The black and white Palestinian Keffiyeh has become the symbol of the anti-Israel movement around the world. But what do the patterns actually mean? Well, Tal Oran has made a name for himself on social media, giving context to some of the Holy Land's most pervasive misunderstandings and deceptions. So, Tal, where does the Palestinian Keffiyeh even come from?
The name Kafia actually comes from a place called Kufa in Iraq or ancient Mesopotamia. It was a city. And it's actually based on an ancient Mesopotamian article of clothing known as the shmach. It was something that was used by the ancient fishing communities of Iraq, the Jews of Iraq, the Christians of Iraq, way before the advent of Arabism or Islam to the region. And it's actually a very ancestral, an old piece of clothing that many people around Mesopotamia, both Assyrians, Yazidis, lay claim to this article of clothing.
So, what do the lines actually stand for?
So we have three different distinct designs on the kafia. I think I'm displaying all three perfectly right now. Wow, I did that nice. So we have two lines, these two gray symbols right here, these two gray lines. They symbolize the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, respectively. These are the ancient lifeblood of Mesopotamia. And they're actually the rivers that my grandparents swam in as kids. I have a picture of my grandpa, because he was born and raised in Baghdad, swimming in the Tigris River that cuts through Baghdad. Then we have down here the symbol of the ripples on the river. So you can see in between the lines of the river, you have the actual ripples of the river. And then up here, you have the fishing nets. The fishing nets symbolize the ancient fishing communities of the marshes of southern Iraq. The lifeblood of the Mesopotamian people are these Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Similar how to the Nile was the lifeblood of the ancient Egyptians, Mesopotamia, which scales back around 5,000 years ago, both the Akkadians, the Sumerians, and the Mesopotamians, the Babylonians, use the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in their everyday life. And this is an article of clothing that represents them. And even these people claim that if you look on ancient Akkadian and Sumerian statues, like statues of Sargon of Akkad or the Gilgamesh, like the depictions of them, that you'll see very similar designs to what we have in the Keffiyeh.
So, how does a head cover from the Iraq, Babylon area become the symbol of the Palestinian people, the symbol, frankly, globally, of the anti-Israel movement?
Through cultural appropriation, unfortunately. And basically, when Arabs colonized the region, because people don't know this, and this is kind of what my whole shtick is about, Arabs come from one specific place in the Middle East, which is between the regions of Mecca and Medina, between the Halij and the Hijaz, which are the Gulf states. This is really where Arab identity was built out. And through Islamic colonization and Arab colonization of the entire Middle East and North Africa, they started taking and laying claim to different articles of clothing, different cultures, force changing people's religions and languages, similar to the colonization that took place in the Western world. Very, very similar, almost exactly the same. And then one of the things that was taken and propagated around the Arab world, whatever the Arab world means, was this kafia. It became popularized around the Arab world. But in 1967, Yasser Arafat, an Egyptian, I call him a warlord, some people call him a politician, he's a terrorist who propagated the deaths of thousands of Israelis and Palestinians, by the way. When he started the First and Second Intifada, he used this as sort of a symbol of resistance for the Palestinian cause. You would see him wearing this throughout his career because at certain points during the Ottoman Empire and during the Arab rule of the region, they had moved this from Iraq and brought it around the Arab world, and it was shared between Arab people or Arabized people. But he really started using this in 1967 to use it first to cover people's faces when they were committing terrorist acts or throwing rocks or stabbing people, but also as an article of Palestinian resistance. But it has no connection to Palestine whatsoever. This has nothing to do with the word Palestine, with the Palestinian people, or even with the Levant.
I find that absolutely fascinating. I think there's just so many half-truths and misconceptions and platitudes that are said on social media that just, one, don't make sense, and then two, if you just understand what the history of a lot of these things, a lot of narratives would crumble, and that's what you do on social media. And one of the ones that I know you're particularly passionate about is the idea that Israel is, quote, a white European colonial project. How would you respond?
I respond by wearing my shirt that says white colonizer on it. Unironically, since October 7th, I've been labeled a white colonizer, a Nazi, a genocider. when in reality, my parents were literally kicked out of their homes and kicked out of their country by actual Nazis, by actual colonizers. So all I do in reality is I just show the Mizrahi Jewish story. I put it on the forefront, and I try to push people and the Jewish world and the Christian world and the Muslim world to pay attention to the story of our people. People don't know this, but there was almost 1 million Jewish people from the Middle East and North Africa that were violently kicked out and ethnically cleansed from their homes before 1948 and after 1948. But for example, my family was affected by this violence and these pogroms before the creation of the state of Israel was even there. So, when you look into the history of the Jews in the Middle East, first of all, they predate the existence of Muslims and Arabs as a cohesive group. But when you look into the history of it, once Arabs took rule, they always like to make this claim that we lived in peace and everything was kumbaya. We had a peaceful existence one with another. And it was only when Israel was established in 1948 that Christians, Jews, and Muslims couldn't get along together in the Middle East. But that is such a whitewashing of history. I call it an Arab washing because it's not real. The reality is that the Arab overlords of the Middle East, they would treat Jews and Christians as dhimmis. We would have to pay a jizya tax, and everybody knows these are just talking terms, but people don't know all the thousands of pogroms, massacres, a countless, endless atrocities similar akin to October 7th that happened, but just for literally 1,000 years, since the 6th century. Since after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, it was just non-stop massacres against Jewish people.
I think to me, as someone who's been to Israel 30 times and spent a lot of the past decade and a half of my life learning about Jewish history, I think the Mizrahi story, as you mentioned, is not just one of, but is the most misunderstood and least understood stories of this whole Holy Land conflict. The idea that Israel is a bunch of white people, and think obviously, yeah, there's white people, but if you go to Israel, and this is a statistic that's absolutely crucial, more than 50% of Israeli Jews, more than 50% of Israeli Jews are from the Middle East, North Africa. They're Tunisian, they're Moroccan, they're Persian, they're Turkish, they're Egyptian, they're Libyan, and these people have been there for thousands of years. Some of them since the Babylonian conquest, 500 BC. And so I think what you're doing is just so important, which is just adding context, maybe even popping some narrative bubbles just to allow people to think. So Tal, in closing, what do you hope people do, I guess you could say, when approaching the subject of Israel and the Holy Land, and they want to have a nuanced, balanced view of what's actually happening?
So even today, like neo-Nazis on the far right, right? And then like Arab supremacists on the far left. It's funny because Ashkenazis are like stuck in the middle of that. The
Ashkenazi
ultra
being European Jewish folks.
Jews who had lived in the diaspora in Europe, like people on the far right will not consider them white people, right? Like white supremacists will consider them something else, not white people. But then Arab supremacists will be like, they're all white. So it's like they're stuck in the middle and they can't win. But they've never in the history of planet Earth, that's the reason why they were ethnically cleansed from Europe, was because they were literally considered not white. They were known to be not from Europe, which is why they endured the Holocaust and all these terrible pogroms. Just a quick little clarification.
No, I think that's absolutely crucial. So, Tal, in closing, what do you hope people do or think about when approaching the Holy Land to have a more nuanced and balanced understanding of the current situation?
We need to all understand and change our terminology on how we see the Middle East. I think for a long time, even me growing up in the United States of America, we were all like sort of programmed to believe that the Middle East was just all Arab or Muslim. The reality is similar to the Native American tribes that existed in the USA and in South America before colonization. Very, very diverse region full of thousands of ethnic groups of people. We need to reframe, and some of them are still living today in the Middle East. Some of them are still surviving and enduring the absolute abuse by the Arab Muslim supremacists in the region. We need to reframe how we think about the Middle East and change the terminology from the Arab world, the Muslim world, to the Arabized world, the Islamized world, and understand this is my biggest push, especially for Christians in America. Understand that the jihadism and the Islamism that is attacking the state of Israel in the Middle East is coming for each and every single one of us. Arab Christians, the Christians of the Middle East, are being massacred every day. It doesn't stop on the borders of Morocco or Israel. It comes to America. it comes to Europe. That fight is our fight together. Jews and Christians need to stand together in the face of this evil.
Tal, thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you, brother.